She lived in a small rented room above a tailor's shop at the edge of town. The room had a single window that looked down at a narrow street where scooters passed more often than cars. In the mornings she woke before the shop opened, mostly because the sun slipped through the thin curtains too easily. She never complained about it. She rarely complained about anything. Her life moved in small routines. She left home with a cloth bag on her shoulder, walked to work, returned before dark, cooked something simple, and sat quietly for the rest of the evening. The neighbors knew her face but not much else. They described her the same way every time. Polite, soft-spoken, forgettable. If she didn't step outside for 2 days, no one would notice immediately. At work she handled tasks no one else wanted. Filing old papers, organizing storage shelves, wiping dusty counters. She never argued about shifts and never asked for favors. Because of that, people trusted her but rarely included her in plans. She listened to conversations more than she joined them. When others laughed loudly, she smiled gently, as if she understood but didn't want to interrupt the moment. There was one habit she kept hidden even from herself. Sometimes, while waiting for water to boil or clothes to dry, her fingers moved lightly on the table surface. They tapped in patterns, slow and careful. If someone walked by, she immediately stopped and folded her hands. She didn't explain the movement because she didn't fully explain it to herself either. One afternoon, while she was sorting papers near the front desk, a bright poster was taped onto the glass door. A volunteer group announced a community evening gathering. There would be food stalls, games for children, and a small open stage where anyone could perform. Singing, acting, storytelling, anything welcome. People around her became excited instantly. They discussed jokes they could tell and songs they could attempt. Someone mentioned bringing a guitar. Another person talked about dancing with friends. The office filled with ideas that lasted longer than actual work that day. She glanced at the poster once and then looked away, but her fingers pressed lightly against the desk surface afterward, tapping without sound. Later, during tea break, a coworker joked that everyone should sign up for something, even if it was silly. They passed around a pen and a sign-up sheet the organizer had left behind. Names filled quickly, many written half seriously and half for fun. When the paper reached her, she tried to pass it along. But the person next to her paused and said they once heard she could play piano. It was said casually, as if remembering a rumor from long ago. Others turned toward her with curiosity. She gave a small laugh and shook her head. She said she only knew very basic tunes and had not played in years. She tried to hand the paper forward again. The pen remained in front of her. Someone insisted it didn't matter. The event was friendly. No judges, no prizes. Just neighbors sharing something simple. They said she could play only one short melody. No pressure at all. For a moment she felt a strange tightening in her chest. It wasn't fear exactly, and it wasn't excitement. It felt like standing near a door she had closed long ago without noticing she still had the key. She told them she would think about it. That night, she ate quietly as usual. The room hummed with distant traffic and the soft whir of the ceiling fan. She washed her dishes, placed them upside down to dry, and sat near the window. Across the street, a small shop played music from an old speaker. The melody was uneven and slightly distorted, but clear enough to follow. Her fingers moved again on the wooden windowsill. This time she did not stop immediately. She followed the notes she heard, tapping softly. Then she continued even after the song ended, adding her own changes without realizing it. After a minute she pulled her hands away as if caught doing something private. She stared at them for a long time. The next morning she arrived at work earlier than usual. The sign-up sheet was still on the desk. She stood there alone, reading the names of others. Some had written jokes beside their entries. Some promised loud performances. The space at the bottom remained empty. She picked up the pen, held it above the paper, lowered it, lifted it again. Finally she wrote her name in small letters and added just 2 words beside it. Simple piano. She stared at what she had written, almost surprised it existed. Then she folded the paper and placed it where the organizer could see it easily. When others discovered it later, reactions were lighthearted. Some clapped jokingly. Some promised to cheer loudly even if she forgot halfway. She smiled and accepted their kindness but avoided long conversations about it. Inside, she kept repeating that she would only play something very short. During the following days she wondered where she would even practice. The town had no music schools nearby. She didn't own an instrument anymore. For a moment she considered withdrawing her name quietly. Instead she walked farther than usual after work one evening and reached the old community hall. The building stayed unlocked during the day because children used it for art classes. Inside, near the back wall, stood an upright piano covered with a faded cloth. She hesitated before lifting the cover. Dust rose gently into the air. The keys were yellowed but intact. She pressed one carefully. The sound came out slightly rough but alive. She sat down slowly, as if afraid the moment might disappear if she moved too quickly. Her hands rested above the keyboard without touching it. She closed her eyes, trying to remember the simplest melody she once knew. The first notes were uncertain. She paused often, correcting herself. Yet each attempt grew steadier. Minutes passed unnoticed. Outside, the sky darkened. A caretaker eventually entered to close the hall and found her still seated there. She apologized immediately and prepared to leave, but the caretaker only nodded kindly and said she could return any time before evening. The piano, he said, was rarely used anyway. From that day she visited almost daily. She never stayed long. Just enough to repeat the same gentle tune until it flowed without mistakes. She avoided complex passages even when her fingers seemed ready for more. She told herself this performance was only to prove she could finish what she started. As the event approached, people at work continued teasing her in friendly ways. They asked if she would perform dramatically or bow at the end. She laughed softly and insisted it would be very ordinary. Inside, though, a quiet nervousness grew. Not about embarrassment, but about something harder to explain. The feeling of opening a part of herself she had carefully kept closed for years. She worried that once others saw it, she might lose the peaceful distance she had built around her life. The evening finally arrived. The street near the hall filled with lights and food stalls. Children ran between tables while music played from speakers. She stood at the edge of the gathering, holding her hands together to keep them from shaking. From outside, laughter and applause drifted from the stage as the first performers entertained the crowd. She watched for a while before stepping inside quietly. The piano waited under warm yellow lights, already cleaned and ready. She took a slow breath and sat on a nearby chair, waiting for her turn, telling herself again and again that it would only be a simple tune. Nothing more, nothing less. The chair felt colder than she expected. While people laughed near the stage, she sat off to the side and watched the performers one by one. A group of children sang loudly without worrying about missing notes. A man told jokes that only half the audience understood but everyone still clapped for. The evening was warm and friendly, the kind of gathering where mistakes became part of the fun. She kept reminding herself she was not there to impress anyone. Yet as she waited, memories began to return with a clarity she had avoided for years. Long ago, before work schedules and rent payments filled her thoughts, she lived in a smaller place with thinner walls and a much louder neighborhood. In that house stood an old upright piano that had already lived many lives before reaching her family. Several keys were chipped, and two produced sounds slightly sharper than the others. The pedals creaked whenever pressed. Still, to her it looked grand. It had belonged to a relative who moved away and could not carry it along. No one else in the family played, so it became a piece of furniture that gathered dust. But children notice objects adults ignore. One afternoon she lifted the lid and pressed a key out of curiosity. The sound surprised her. It was simple yet clear, and it stayed in the air longer than she expected. She pressed another, then another, slowly building small patterns without knowing what she was doing. She did not call it music then. It was more like discovering a language she almost understood. There were no lessons, no instructions, and no money for teachers. She learned by listening to radio songs and repeating the parts she liked. At first everything sounded uneven. She would play the same part again and again until it matched what she heard in her mind. Sometimes she failed for hours, but she never felt tired during those attempts. Evenings became her favorite time. After everyone slept, she played softly so the neighbors would not complain. The quiet house made each note feel important. She began to notice how certain combinations created feelings: comfort, sadness, hope, though she could not explain why. The piano slowly became the place she went whenever words felt too heavy. Years passed this way. School, small responsibilities, and music filling the spaces between. People occasionally praised her, but she never performed for crowds. Playing was private, almost secret, like writing thoughts in a diary no one read. Then life changed faster than she expected. Financial problems reached the family suddenly. Conversations at home became serious. The piano stayed silent more often as she started helping outside the house. After school, she worked part-time jobs instead of sitting at the keys. Days shortened into tasks and sleep. At first, she promised herself it was temporary. She would return soon, she thought. But weeks turned into months. Dust covered the keyboard again. When she finally sat down after a long gap, her fingers felt unfamiliar, slower than memory suggested. The frustration stung, and she closed the lid gently, telling herself she would try another day. Another day took a long time to arrive. Eventually the house was sold. Furniture left piece by piece. The piano went with a buyer who needed it more than they did. She watched it being carried away but said nothing. She believed she had already stepped away from that part of life. Yet the empty corner felt strangely loud afterward. From then on she avoided thinking about music too deeply. Whenever she heard a melody she recognized, she hummed quietly and changed the radio station. It was easier to let the habit fade than to feel what was missing. Years later, when coworkers mentioned she once played, she almost denied it completely. Not because it was untrue, but because it belonged to someone she no longer recognized in herself. Sitting in the community hall now, she rubbed her palms together and looked at the piano waiting near the stage. The instrument looked newer than the one from her childhood, but something about the shape felt familiar. She wondered if memories lived inside hands even when the mind tried to forget. Her turn was still far away. She stepped outside for air. Food stalls filled the street with warm smells, and children ran carrying balloons. No one paid attention to her. Everyone was busy enjoying the evening. She appreciated that. Being unnoticed allowed her to breathe normally. She thought about leaving before her name was called. She could claim illness tomorrow. No one would be upset. The idea lingered for several minutes. But then she remembered the caretaker who unlocked the hall each afternoon without questions, and the quiet moments she spent relearning the simple melody. Those small efforts felt important. Walking away now would make them disappear as if they never happened. So she returned inside and waited again. As performers finished, applause echoed and faded repeatedly. With each round, her heartbeat grew stronger but steadier too, like preparing for something she had once known well. She rested her hands on her lap and practiced pressing invisible keys, not for skill but for comfort. Someone announced that only a few participants remained. She realized her turn was close. Instead of panic, she felt a strange calm. The goal was no longer to prove talent. It was simply to sit at the piano and not run away from it this time. When her name was finally called, she stood carefully. The walk to the stage felt longer than the distance suggested. Lights warmed her face, and the audience blurred into shapes rather than individuals. That helped. If she couldn't see expectations, she didn't have to carry them. She sat down, placed her fingers gently above the keys, and remembered the child who once pressed a single note just to hear how long it could last. For the first time in many years, she allowed herself to feel that same quiet curiosity again. She adjusted the bench slightly, not because it was uncomfortable, but because her hands needed a moment longer to settle. The hall still carried the soft noise of people whispering, chairs shifting, and a child asking a question too loudly before being hushed. The microphone nearby remained unused. She had no intention of speaking. Words would only make her think too much. Her fingers hovered above the keys. For a second they did nothing. She listened to the room instead. The small echoes, the distant clink of cups, the faint hum of ceiling fans. Then she pressed the first note. It sounded gentle and plain, exactly as promised. A few people relaxed in their seats. Someone coughed. Another person checked a phone before quickly putting it away out of politeness. It was the kind of beginning everyone expected from someone who had warned them it would be simple. She played the melody slowly, carefully placing each note where she remembered it belonged. Her shoulders remained tense, and her breathing shallow. The first line ended, then the next. The tune felt familiar but slightly stiff, like greeting an old friend after many silent years. In the third repeat, something changed. Not outside, inside. Her hands stopped trembling. The gaps between notes grew more natural. Instead of recalling the melody step by step, she began to feel where it wanted to go. The keys no longer seemed like separate pieces she had to manage. They felt connected, part of one path her fingers already understood. She allowed a softer touch, then a stronger one. The melody gained shape. She added a gentle harmony with the other hand, a habit she once used without thinking. The sound deepened, filling spaces in the room that had previously held whispers. A few heads lifted. She still looked at the keyboard, unaware of their attention. The simple tune expanded carefully, not faster, just fuller. Each repeated phrase carried a small difference. A longer pause here, a warmer chord there. The music began to breathe. People stopped shifting in their chairs. The child who had been restless leaned quietly against a parent's arm. Conversations near the door faded without anyone asking them to stop. She moved into the middle section she practiced alone in the hall many afternoons. Her confidence grew as her memory stopped interfering. She was no longer searching for the next note. She was listening to the one she had just played and answering it. The sound reminded her of late evenings long ago, when she played softly so others would not wake. That memory guided her hands more than practice ever could. She followed it instinctively. The right hand carried the melody, but the left began weaving gentle patterns beneath it. Not complicated, just steady and supportive. The tune that once felt small now spread across the room like a story told without words. Someone near the back set down a cup carefully to avoid noise. Another person lowered a phone instead of recording, choosing to watch instead. The hall grew quieter in a natural way, as if everyone agreed silently not to interrupt. She leaned slightly closer to the keyboard. Her breathing matched the rhythm. When a phrase ended, she let the silence linger a fraction longer before continuing. That pause held attention stronger than volume ever could. The melody reached a familiar peak, the point where she once used to stop when she was younger because she did not know how to continue. Tonight she did not stop. Her hands moved forward. Guided by memory she did not realize she still carried. A gentle variation appeared. Then another. The music remained recognizable but no longer predictable. It sounded less like practice and more like conversation. A man who had been standing near the entrance stepped fully inside. Others followed quietly. The doorway filled, yet no one spoke. Even the workers at the refreshment table paused to listen from where they stood. She finally glanced up for a moment, not at faces but at the soft lights above the audience. The brightness blurred the details, leaving only silhouettes. That helped her forget expectations again. She returned her gaze to the keys and continued, calmer now. Her hands crossed briefly, something she had not planned. The movement surprised her but felt right. The notes flowed without hesitation afterward. The tune carried warmth rather than careful caution. She trusted it. Time passed differently while she played. The beginning felt distant though only minutes had gone by. She no longer counted measures. She followed feeling instead of memory, shaping the ending slowly so it would not arrive too suddenly. The room had become still. Even the ceiling fan seemed quieter, though it had not slowed. People listened without leaning, without whispering, without checking anything else. The music held them gently in place. She softened the volume and repeated the opening phrase once more, now calmer and deeper than before. It sounded like the same tune heard from far away, after understanding its meaning. Each note settled carefully before the next began. Her final chord approached. She sensed it more than calculated it. The last harmony formed under her fingers and lingered in the air. She lifted her hands slowly, unsure for a moment whether she had actually finished or only paused. The sound faded completely. The silence that followed felt larger than the hall itself. For a brief moment after the last note disappeared, she wondered if she had made a mistake. The quiet felt almost unreal. She kept her hands close to her lap, unsure whether to stand or continue sitting. The audience did not move. No coughs, no whispers, no clapping yet. Just stillness that seemed to stretch longer than expected. Then a single clap sounded from somewhere near the front. Another followed, then another, until the entire hall filled with applause. It was not loud immediately. It grew gradually, like people were returning from far away and remembering where they were. Soon the sound became warm and full, echoing around the walls. She looked up, startled by the sudden change. Faces that had been shapes before were now clear, smiling, surprised, some even emotional. A few people stood without realizing they had done so. Others remained seated but clapped with steady rhythm. Not hurried, not polite, genuine. She rose carefully from the bench. Her first instinct was to leave quickly, but the applause continued and made her pause. She gave a small nod instead of a formal bow, unsure what was expected. The reaction only grew stronger for a few seconds before slowly settling. As she stepped away from the piano, she felt light, almost unsteady, as if she had walked a long distance and only now noticed her legs. The host approached, smiling wider than before, and thanked her quietly while guiding her toward the side of the stage. He did not ask questions yet. He seemed to understand she needed a moment. Behind the curtain, the sounds of the next performer preparing mixed with lingering applause from people still talking about what they had just heard. She stood near the wall, breathing slowly, trying to return to normal. Her hands still felt warm, carrying the memory of the keys beneath them. A volunteer handed her a cup of water. She accepted it with both hands to stop them from trembling slightly. She had not noticed the tension leaving her until now. Instead of relief alone, she felt something softer, recognition. Not from others, but from herself. Several minutes passed before people began approaching. They did not rush all at once. One by one, they came with simple words. Someone said the music reminded them of home. Another said they forgot they were in a crowded hall while listening. A woman admitted she had planned to leave early, but stayed because she wanted to hear the ending properly. She responded quietly to each comment, often with just a smile and a thank you. She did not know how to explain what she had played because she had not planned it fully. Explaining would have made it smaller than it felt. A child who had been restless earlier came close and asked if the piano was difficult. She knelt slightly to answer that it becomes easier when you stop worrying about mistakes. The child nodded seriously as if receiving important advice and ran back to a parent. The caretaker from the hall found her soon after. He spoke gently, saying he never expected the old piano to sound like that again. He mentioned he had heard many rehearsals over the years, but none filled the room the same way. She thanked him for allowing her to practice there. He shrugged and said the instrument had simply been waiting for someone patient enough to listen to it. The event continued around them. Laughter, announcements, music from speakers. Yet her corner felt separate, calmer. People still glanced toward her occasionally, not staring, just acknowledging. She realized they now saw something they had not noticed before, though she had not changed in appearance at all. The organizer approached later with a thoughtful expression rather than excitement. He asked whether she had performed publicly before. She shook her head. He seemed surprised but did not question further. Instead, he suggested she consider playing again at future gatherings if she wished. There was no pressure in his voice, only invitation. She did not answer immediately. The idea of repeating the experience felt both comforting and unfamiliar. For years she avoided situations where attention followed her. Tonight had been different because she focused on the music instead of the crowd. She told him she would think about it, and he accepted that without insistence. As the night grew later, the audience slowly thinned. Families gathered children, friends finished conversations, and volunteers began cleaning tables. She helped collect empty cups automatically, returning to the habit of doing small tasks. A few people protested, saying she should rest instead, but she smiled and continued. Doing something ordinary grounded her again. Before leaving, she walked back to the stage once more. The piano stood quiet under softer lights now. No one else watched. She placed her hand gently on the top panel, not opening it, just acknowledging it. The wood felt cool. The moment felt complete in a way she could not describe aloud. Outside, the night air carried distant traffic sounds and fading laughter from those still saying goodbye. She stepped onto the street with her bag on her shoulder, the same as any other evening, yet her pace slowed. She noticed details she usually ignored. The glow from shop windows, the quiet rhythm of footsteps on pavement, the calm after shared noise. On the walk home, she replayed parts of the performance in memory, not to judge them but to understand why they mattered. She realized she had not played for approval. She had played to finish something she once left unfinished. The applause had been kind, but the real change happened before it began. Reaching her building, she climbed the stairs gently to avoid waking anyone. Inside her room, everything looked the same. The chair near the window, the small table, the thin curtains. She placed her bag down and sat without turning on extra lights. Silence surrounded her again, familiar and comfortable. Her fingers rested on the table surface. After a moment they moved lightly, repeating a quiet pattern from earlier that evening. This time she did not stop. She let the rhythm continue until it naturally faded. She realized she was no longer afraid of remembering. The next morning felt strangely quiet even though the street sounded the same as always. Scooters passed, shop shutters lifted, and voices floated up from below the building. She stood by the window longer than usual before getting ready for work. The night before had not changed her routine, yet something inside her felt lighter, as if a long-held breath had finally been released. At work, people greeted her differently. Not loudly, not dramatically, but with a warmth that carried curiosity. A few coworkers mentioned the performance immediately. One said they did not expect the hall to become so silent. Another admitted they had told friends about it already. She listened, smiled gently, and continued organizing papers as she always did. What surprised her most was that the attention did not make her uncomfortable. Because the music had already ended, there was nothing to prove anymore. Their words felt like simple conversation, not pressure. During lunch break, someone asked if she had practiced for years in secret. She shook her head and explained she had only returned to it recently. They seemed puzzled but accepted the answer. People often searched for complicated explanations, yet sometimes a moment came from something ordinary that had been waiting quietly. Later that afternoon, she finished work and began walking home as usual. Halfway there she slowed near the road leading to the community hall. Without planning, she turned toward it. The building stood open, sunlight resting on the steps. Children's drawings hung near the entrance from an earlier class. Inside, the caretaker noticed her and nodded in greeting. He did not ask why she came. He simply unlocked the hall and moved aside as if the reason were obvious. The piano waited where it had been before, covered again with the faded cloth. She uncovered it carefully and sat down. This time she did not choose the same tune. Instead she pressed a few single notes, listening to how the empty hall carried them. The sound felt calmer than during the event, like speaking in a quiet room after a busy gathering. She began playing slowly, not rehearsing, not preparing, just letting the notes form small paths. Some sounded unfinished, some repeated, yet none felt wrong. For the first time she did not worry about where the music should go. She allowed it to exist only for that moment. Minutes passed, then more. She did not notice time until the caretaker mentioned evening approaching. She thanked him and covered the piano again, but before leaving she paused. She asked if she could come again on other days. He smiled and said the hall was rarely busy in the afternoons. She was welcome whenever she wished. From then on, the visits became part of her routine. Work, walk, piano, home. Not every day, but often enough that her hands grew familiar with the keys again. Sometimes children from nearby classes listened quietly through the doorway. Sometimes no one came at all. Both felt equally peaceful. She did not prepare for another performance. She did not search for opportunities. The music existed simply because she enjoyed playing. That alone felt new. In the past she had always measured progress, learning faster, improving technique, reaching some invisible goal. Now she measured nothing. Weeks passed. The memory of the event softened but did not fade. People in town still recognized her occasionally and mentioned the night they heard her play. Their words no longer surprised her. She accepted them kindly and moved on, carrying groceries or returning from work like any other day. One afternoon, the organizer from the gathering visited the hall while she practiced. He listened from a distance until she finished. Instead of suggesting another stage appearance immediately, he asked whether playing again had been difficult after so many years away. She thought carefully before answering. She said the difficult part was not the music but allowing herself time for it. Life had once felt too urgent for quiet things. Now she understood quiet things were what made life feel complete. He nodded thoughtfully and mentioned a future community evening planned months ahead. Not as a request, only information. She appreciated that. The choice remained hers, and that freedom made the idea less intimidating. After he left, she continued playing, noticing her hands moved more naturally each day. She no longer repeated mistakes with frustration. Instead she paused, breathed, and tried again. The process felt patient rather than demanding. At home her evenings changed too. She spent less time staring at the window and more time remembering melodies she once liked. Sometimes she tapped rhythms on the table while water boiled. Other nights she wrote small notes on paper, so she would not forget them before the next visit to the piano. The room itself seemed warmer, though nothing had been replaced. Even her neighbors commented she looked more awake in the mornings. She did not realize the difference until they mentioned it. Perhaps they noticed the small smile she carried without thinking. Months later, another gathering approached. She considered whether to participate. The decision no longer felt heavy. Playing had already become part of her life again, with or without an audience. After several days she wrote her name on the sign-up sheet once more, this time without hesitation. The evening arrived calmer than the first. She recognized many faces in the crowd and felt no need to hide from them. When her turn came, she walked to the piano with steady steps. She played differently now, not trying to recreate the past night, not trying to surprise anyone, simply sharing what she enjoyed at that moment. The audience listened warmly again, though the reaction felt less shocking and more familiar. She appreciated that. The music belonged to everyone listening, not only to one unforgettable surprise. Afterward, she did not rush away or stand frozen. She spoke comfortably with people, answered simple questions, and even laughed at small jokes about her quiet nature. The stage no longer felt like a separate world. It was just another place she could sit and play. Walking home later, she realized the biggest change was not confidence in front of others. It was permission she had given herself, permission to keep something gentle in her life even when responsibilities existed. She reached her building and paused before entering, listening to distant sounds of the town settling into night. The same street, the same room, the same routine waited upstairs, yet it all felt fuller now. Inside, she placed her bag down and rested her hands on the table. Instead of tapping absent-mindedly, she smiled and whispered softly to herself that she would return to the hall tomorrow. The moment that once surprised a crowd had quietly reshaped her days. Not by making her famous or changing her work, but by reminding her she had never truly lost the part of herself she thought was gone. And this time she chose not to leave it behind again.